Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's special Yuletide performance will include Happy Elvises, humble Pickles, and at least one dark elf druid mage sheep. All this and more on a very merry episode of Created Things. And welcome to this very merry episode of Created Things, the only podcast hosted by two guys who are completely fake, but that doesn't mean that we aren't somehow ultra real. I am artist and psychotherapist Jacob Flores Popchek. With me, as always, is my best and festive buddy, Father Gabriel Torretta of the Dominican Order. How you doing? Father?
Great. Doing real good.
What did you say a second ago? You said it sounded like Jabba the Hutt.
I said ad sum. It's what you say in Latin when people say, like, "Are you here?" and you say, "Yeah, I'm here." You say ad sum. It's
it sounded like Jabba the Hutt, like ad sum bakata.
No Jabba no bada. Yeah,
exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, listen, I don't have Hutt memorized, okay? Who would? Because that would be psycho. And, like, literally nobody does. And I'm not even going to explain why it's not a language. Which it isn't, by the way. It's garbage. Did you know that George Lucas is absolutely garbage at pretending to have made up languages? It's insane.
And a lot of other things as well. But we'll save that for our inevitable Star Wars breakdown episode.
Fact.
This is what will hopefully be the first episode in a pseudo series for the holidays. We'll see if we can actually make that happen this time. We were hoping for kind of a series for Halloween, and then, my life became the ever spiraling hell coaster that it always is. And
which is actually very appropriate for Halloween. So it was thematic. Right. It just didn't really produce thematic shows, But
it was
thematic reality,
inconvenient.
Which is cool. Yeah. I mean,
right. Thematic but inconvenient is actually my brand, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I was cool with that. But we'll see if we can pull off this whole Christmas thing. Today we're talking about Christmas kitsch. And in preparation, those of you watching on our video version on YouTube will see I'm wearing the first of many Christmas sweaters that I own. I also have my Santa Claus mug today.
Ooh,
so
precious.
I am all prepared. I am a Christmas fiend.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
And especially in the poppy sort of kitschy elements of Christmas, although I might have a different definition of kitsch than you or most people do. So I'm interested to discuss that because we haven't tucked into that at all yet. But maybe we should do this first, Father Gabriel. Can we just, for my purposes as much as for anyone else's, we're talking about Christmas kitsch today, the knickknacks and doodads and who what's its and all those kinds of things. Can we define what we personally mean when we say kitsch? Because I personally don't think that the term kitsch necessarily is a category that encapsulates everything Christmassy. I think there are just some Christmassy things that are kitsch. And I have my own definition, but what would your definition be personally for the workingness of this episode?
I feel like I should have thought about this beforehand, but if I did, it wouldn't really be Created Things. So I don't think I have a strong distinction in my mind between the judgment tacky and the name kitsch.
Okay.
So I
think because tacky is a judgment.
Yeah. I identified
we have a
judgment-free
it
as such.
definition?
This is a judgment-full zone. It's a safe judgment space. Safe space.
What was that
for
thing we
judgments.
said in the first episode? All judgment, no shame.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, thank you. Exactly. This is my life. So in the spirit of all judgment, no shame. I think so. It's things like these sort of when I think about this, particularly with Christmas, what immediately is going to come to mind is sort of like wildly over the top, sort of ferociously embraced public material aspects of the holiday season, like the leading up to the Christmas season. So I'm thinking of things like not just we have lights on the edging the roof of our house, but we have like a giant light up reindeer, and we might have like one of those Santa tubes that sort of like falls and goes, like you're selling a used car. And you might have like a whole series of, in fact, like if you're more wealthy, you might have like a whole series of things that move and things on your front lawn. Like I feel like we suddenly crossed the line there that something has changed from like I have a line of lights of some kind or another outlining the physical features of my house to I have like light up glowing animals and like waving Santa figures and possibly like gnomes and various creatures that don't actually have any Christmas association at all on the front yard of my house. We have crossed into a different zone. And that new zone that we're in is what I would call kitsch as a kind of working conceptual definition.
But see, the hole I will poke in there is that it seems to me that kitsch for you is a quantity rather than a quality sort of a thing. That past a certain point of numbers of things, like the extraness of that becomes kitschy, which, not to force our listeners to have to listen to more than one episode to get what the hell we're talking about, but at the end of our parades conversation, you discussed the virtue of magnanimity and going extra and going hard and doing things as big as you possibly can. And I would wrestle personally to find the line between the sort of extraness that you're talking about with what you're presumably negatively describing as kitsch, and the positive virtue of going extra hard and going as big as you can with the virtue of magnanimity. Before you respond, let me throw in my definition.
Yeah, go for it.
I have thought a lot about kitsch, not just in the Christmas department, so to speak, but in the broader sense. I'm a big fan of Andy Warhol, who did a lot experimenting with Catholic kitsch, and I hope we'll do a whole episode just on the nature of Catholic kitsch itself. I'm sort of a tentative casual fan of John Waters, who calls himself the Pope of kitsch.
Oh my.
So I've thought a lot about like what is kitsch through a non-judgmental objective definition artistically. I want you to poke holes in this if you want to, so we can get to a common definition. But my personal thought is kitsch is mass-produced, ultimately cheap art that is yet inexplicably treated as though it were a significant single piece of produced art.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so there's a lot that I like about that. That it's mass produced as an essential part of it. That at some level it's considered to be art. That's really interesting. That it has a cachet as if it were a real piece of art is a really intriguing
or
idea.
Even just a personal significance, right? Like, that you and I have joked about like Thomas Kincaid paintings, which are both in and outside of the Christmas thing. And like, these are prints of an artist that are relatively cheap to produce, but they're treated with great reverence by the people who own them. The kitschy Christmas dolls or sort of blown plastic figures, right? That's a significant emotional thing, even though 10 billion of that inflated plastic Frosty were made in a single day. That one Frosty is ours, and it's extremely bordering on religiously significant when on the day every year that we put that Frosty out on the lawn, right?
Sure.
So there is this sort of pseudo pop sacredness to kitsch that I think is ironically at odds with how soullessly it's produced. It's like completely cold on it's the opposite of how all other art works, where most art, I'm an artist, I'm creating this thing, I'm pouring myself over it, and then the consumer has the ability to, like in a museum for instance, look at it and walk away. So normally the coldness, the soullessness of the artistic journey, if it's going to happen at all, happens on the end of the viewer rather than the creator. But with kitsch, it is coldly manufactured and produced, soullessly put out there, and then retroactively, almost like a Velveteen Rabbit, given its soul by its owner.
Okay, no, but I like. I mean, I like that. But one thing I like about that is that emotional manipulation is built into it, which seems like an important element. I Yeah, that emotional manipulation is built into it because like it's that sense in which like it's ready made to be like a creature of memory and association, that's like kind of supposed to be your personal memory and association, but it actually is like mass manufactured and belongs to everybody, insofar as it belongs to anybody at all. um
But per the Velveteen Rabbit analogy, which I don't know if you're familiar with that
yeah
children's story. Or,
yeah
okay. So for those of you who are not, there's this little toy bunny, and he knows that he's an inanimate object. He has some level of consciousness, but the more he's loved by his child, the more he becomes an actual rabbit. And there's sort of this weird theology among toys. Consider it like Toy Story meets Animal Farm meets Narnia, where like these toys are like, yes, someday with enough love and affection, we become so unique that we actually become real. And that's what I see as Kitsch, where, you know, maybe when I first buy it, that blown plastic snowman is identical to every blown plastic snowman that was manufactured on the assembly line that day. But within 3, 5, 10 years of putting it out, it becomes increasingly our snowman. Our memories are attached to that, to the degree that if it got destroyed and you said, oh, let me just buy another one of those snowmen, it would not be the same.
See, I don't see that. Because in fact, like,
No?
you do just get another one. Like your Christmas tree, which I'm assuming everybody recognizes, came in a box and was assembled and does not look at all like a tree. But we're happy it does. But we're happy to have it because it's like reusable or whatever. When your like nasty plastic fold out Christmas tree breaks, you just get another one. Like you will have had it for a few years and then you'll just get another one. And like there isn't this emotional attachment. I mean, I think the interchangeability of these objects is actually an essential part of it. Again, made for emotional manipulation, but also made for like replaceability and interchangeability. So I'm not sure I actually see that like existentially.
Okay. No, that's a legitimate point. I mean, I think it's an experiential and subjective point, because I think there are people who are extremely attached to those things. I mean, again, it's the hardest part about this conversation for me is how many topics I'm going to want to get into that we're going to have to avoid because we're sort of artificially breaking this conversation up for the sake of other podcasts, including the fact that I want to do a whole episode on Catholic kitsch itself, separate from this. But, you know, if I have, for instance, that plastic rosary that was mass produced, like that's my rosary. And if I lost it, I wouldn't want that to be gone. If I have that cheap plastic snowman and I'm a little kid who grew up with that, that is going to break my heart. That's been gone. You know, I think when you're talking about emotional attachment, that's more of a subjective thing where like, if you're the dad who put that Christmas tree up and you don't give a crap, yeah, I'm going to throw that away. But if it's the kid who grew up with that Christmas tree, they probably have a name for that specific tree. Like that's Fred the tree. And then like, now we have to get rid of Fred the tree and we got to get Susan the tree instead. And that's sad, you know? So I don't know that I know how to put a label on the subjectivity of the interchangeability.
Right.
We're being so shittily like douchey about plastic kitsch.
Oh yeah, hey, no, that's an important part. Well, listen, I'm gonna on that note.
I just heard myself all of a sudden. I was like,
you
oh
did it.
God, I sound awful.
Yeah, you said it. You used two words that ended in idity in the same sentence, which means that it's time to enter a brave new world of theorizing about kitsch, because we just literally cannot talk about kitsch under any circumstances without talking about Roger Scrutin, who was he died 2 years ago, I think. He's an
Rest in
English
peace, Roger.
philosopher, and who did a lot with like philosophy of beauty stuff in the late 20th century. He wrote a book for our YouTube listeners. It's called Beauty by Roger Scrutin.
It's got a pretty lady on it.
It's got a pretty lady on it from Botticelli. And anyway, he was I have lots of mixed feelings about Roger Scrutin, but he has a whole chapter in this book he wrote about beauty, about kitsch, and he says some really extraordinary things that I think will help. Well, it's nice to have a punching bag. So he says this. Conversely, the degradation of art has never been more apparent. And the most widespread form of degradation, more widespread even than the deliberate desecration of humanity through pornography and gratuitous violence, is kitsch. That peculiar disease which we can instantly recognize but never precisely define, and whose Austro-German name links it to the mass movements and crowd sentiments of the 20th century. Okay, so just in case you thought that was a hot take, I just want to give you another small paragraph, which is literally the world's hottest take about kitsch. So here it goes. The world of kitsch is, in a certain measure, a heartless world in which emotion is directed away from its proper target towards sugary stereotypes, permitting us to pay passing tribute to love and sorrow without the trouble of feeling them. It is no accident that the arrival of kitsch on the stage of human history coincided with the hitherto unimaginable horrors of trench warfare, of the Holocaust and the Gulag, all of them fulfilling the prophecy that kitsch proclaims, which is the transformation of the human being into a doll, which in one moment we cover with kisses and in the next moment tear to shreds.
More like Roger Scrutin, am I right?
I see what you did. You did.
He's a scrupulous nutcase. Was that guy's parents, like his whole family, like murdered by a plastic Santa or something? What the hell?
It's a little hard.
Just hear?
It's a little hard to say. So so like I said, this is, I think, the world's hottest take on kitsch, which gives us not just a straight line descent from one to the other, but a direct causal association between the Holocaust, gulags, gratuitous violence, and pornography and kitsch. The worst of which actually he proposes as kitsch. So
right, which is a radical sentiment. Look, so I will say this, historically there is a connection between Nazism and Christmas kitsch, but it's the reverse of what this feller thinks it is. So
wait, I'm sorry, back up. Wait, there's a what? There is a
connection between Nazism and Christmas kitsch, and even the word kitsch. So Christmas was biggest in terms of its cultural celebration in Germany. I mean, We get Christmas trees from Germany, we get nutcrackers from Germany, we get all of those like old world things that we associate with Christmas. Those are coming in from Germany, and it's a deeply, religious and cultural celebration going all the way back. World War I hits, and then even more so World War II hits. No one's comfortable, and then during the wars themselves, it's not possible to get your Christmas goods from Germany anymore. These handcrafted German goods are not only not possible to get, but it's not chill to get them. Right? You don't want to be supporting the Nazis by buying a Christmas ornament, and they're probably not producing them anyway because they're Nazis. Enter in certain factories, especially in Michigan, and across the U.S. that are primarily creating plastics for like military use and scholastic use and like industrial use, who then say like, we can fill this void. Like we can cheaply produce all these Christmas ornaments, all these things during wartime at a price that Americans can afford on their rations and stipends and things like this. And so the word kitsch is actually, as he says, this Germanic word that then gets attached to basically at that point, things that are imitating German design, but are mass produced in America.
In like plastic.
Right. Yeah.
Huh. That's fascinating. No, I had no idea.
So he's correct that there is like a relationship between kitsch and Nazism, but it's not a positive relationship where one like gives way to the other. It's an antagonistic relationship where this is America's attempt to try to fight off Nazism in their Christmas decoration, basically.
How does America fight the Nazis? Well, with a lot of guns, with Charlie Chaplin, with some very strange Bugs Bunny episodes, and most of all, by mass producing plastic crap so that you can hang it on a Christmas tree.
And I like 4 of those things, and I'll leave it to you to figure out which 4 of those I like.
Gentle reader, he likes all of them.
Yeah, so that's but that said, I don't know if, well, that's not true. I recently read some very weird backward puritanical sexual theology that I really hated. But since that, I have not hated anything that I've read more than what you just said in that quote.
It's incredible. Yeah. Roger Scrutin has this really remarkable ability, particularly when talking about beauty stuff, to say things that I'm really passionate about and to talk about things that I'm really passionate about in ways that I like want to agree with and like completely disagree with from top to bottom. So he's an exciting thinker to engage with on that way. But right. So one thing that's going on with Scrutin, and this is not just to attack him, but this is a big thing. It's a major theme in his work, and it's also, I think, at root when people are talking about Kitsch in general, is that there is a really clear cultural snobbery here. Like Roger Scrutin is a man of like supreme cultural snobbery. And he has ways of theorizing it as a virtue, and it's not 100% evil, but it's just there. So like the snobbish way in which this is to be despised because it's mass produced, because it's mass available, because it appeals, frankly, to the masses, is an essential part of this definition of kitsch, in fact. So, and the way that he's presenting it and the way he's describing it. So, and I think that this is something I try to be careful with myself, because like, it's really hard not to let that sneak into any element of discussion of kitsch, right? Is this like basically what is kitsch? Well, it's the kind of it's the sort of mass culture stuff that I don't like. Right. Like that's the real danger. That's the real danger here. And I recognize that like even in the sort of like over the top definition that I was using at the beginning, like there can be an element of that, so I don't know. Like, so that's I think that's an interesting thing. Like trying to think seriously about kitsch without neither just kind of like wanting to slum it, like, hey guys, let's do what the pearls do, nor like being snobby and just being like, ew, gross. Like poor people do that.
I mean,
so
and that's why I'm sort of using the definition that I am, because again, both personally, like from my own kind of psychological woundedness that we all have, but I have my own version, and then also professionally from my psychological background, my artistic background, there's nothing I hate more than snobbishness or scrupulosity. That doesn't mean I don't like refinement. That doesn't mean I don't like piety, but snobbishness is, the satanic alternative to elegance, refinement. And I would say that scrupulosity is the satanic, store brand alternative to piety. And I hate those two things with a burning passion. And if I see a group of people all mutually hating on something, it is in my nature to try to find what's true, good, and beautiful about that thing. Always. To the degree that I've left movies that I didn't particularly enjoy, heard people crapping on the movie out in the lobby of the theater, and spent hours trying to figure out why I should like that movie. It's amazing. Like it's the opposite of a hipster. Whatever the opposite of a hipster is, where like hipsters need to not like anything that's too cool. I need to like something that's too disliked.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So I've thought long and hard about a non-judgmental way to define kitsch, and I'm actually going to backpedal slightly, rewind slightly to your Christmas tree example. When you say we just throw out the Christmas tree, I think that's a bad example of kitsch, because the thing, so to be kitsch, right, we're basically saying, we're at least implying, and maybe you disagree with this implication, but what I'm inferring from what you're saying is, to be kitsch, it has to be mass produced, and it's mass produced imitation of a real or otherwise artisan object, right? So here I'm this old German wood carver. I carve this beautiful old wooden nutcracker, but then here's the plastic copy of it that there are 10,000 of. I think that your Christmas tree example is a bad one, though, because the real thing it's based on is also in and of itself inherently transitory. If I cut down a real Christmas tree, as I do every year, and I bring it home,
Murderer.
tops Candlemas, I gotta throw that thing out. Although I did make it last to March 21st once, and it was just awful. It was a terrible idea.
Wow. Holy fire hazard, Batman.
It was on the 14th floor of an apartment building.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Yes.
Okay,
so,
side note. Let me just tell this story. I get this live tree. I put it in the elevator. I hike it up to my 14th floor apartment in Pittsburgh, which you got to see.
I did.
I'm extremely depressed because I'm in grad school. And once Christmas is over, I just emotionally cannot handle taking down everything. And so I decided to leave it up with all the decorations on until in like March, around like March 21st or so, I get an email from the landlord that says, hey, because you're moving out in 2 months, we're going to tour the apartment tomorrow. So
oh my gosh.
Just, straighten up a little bit. And I'm like, oh geez, I have a live tree in here. Now, miraculously, this thing has not shed a single needle since I put it up. Not
until
a
you
single
touch it.
needle. Until I
At
touch it to
which
take it
point-
down. It explodes. So I carried on the carcass, the sort of bony skeleton, fish skeleton of this thing, down to the dumpster. I throw that away. And then I'm left with a trail of needles, a huge pile in my apartment, and then a trail of needles from my apartment down the hall to the elevator. And and I don't have a vacuum cleaner or a shop vac. I have a dustpan and a broom.
Because we have established a graduate student, morbidly depressed. Everything's great.
Right, morbidly depressed graduate student. So I'm left with a deep predicament of how to get rid of these needles in a very short amount of time. And then I see my salvation. The crack between the floor and the floor of the elevator.
Oh, man,
slit.
yeah. Oh, yeah, that elevator shaft was begging for Christmas cheer.
It was, in fact, in March. So I just kept hitting the button over again. And I put like a brick or something, like a book or something, in the way of the door so that it couldn't close. The other elevator was still available for other people. And I just prayed that no one would come up and see what I was doing as I swept literally every single needle, like a full tree. I swept the contents, like the deconstructed contents of a full tree, into the slit between the floor and the elevator. And then I closed the doors and walked back into my apartment. That's my side story. That said, a tree itself is inherently transitory. I throw that away at the end of the season. So I don't know that we could call a plastic Christmas tree kitsch or make an argument that kitsch is inherently like throwawayable based on using the example of a artificial Christmas tree. Because the things we put on an artificial Christmas tree, those ornaments, those do have tremendous sentimental sacred value. There were 10,000 of that baby's first Christmas ornament that were produced that day on the assembly line. But no, God forbid anything happens to that baby's first Christmas ornament. That would be horrifying.
That's an interesting point. Although, okay, so point taken, particularly with that suddenly something crosses a line where it's no longer replaceable. But there is part of this is material irreplaceability, because the Avon ballerina Christmas ornaments that my aunt gave us for Christmas one year, there were, probably millions made of these little Avon. I don't know why Avon was making ballerina Christmas ornaments. I don't know how it ended up in my house, but it did. In fact, several of them did. Millions of them were made. Because
as we established in our episode where we briefly touched on essential oils, you love pyramid schemes.
I love, ladies and gentlemen, pyramid schemes and I. A mini-series.
It'll be a whole episode.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, a mini series on pyramid schemes. All right,
Yes.
let's do it.
How could we not? Millions of these things were made.
Right.
By the next year, they become like that legendary substance in that greatest of all possible films, Avatar, unobtainium.
Yes.
Yes. Never forget. What are they? What is George Bush? I mean, the Americans. I mean, the evil white people. What are they destroying Fern Gully for? Sorry, the space planet. For it's a substance called, quote, unobtainium, which several times they mention in the film and never aver to the fact that this is humiliating and that everyone in the room has just lost humanity points because of having heard this. But there it is. So something becomes unobtainium with the passage of time, right? And so like like irreplaceability does enter into this, you know. Like if I broke it that year, I could have just gotten another one and it'd be no big deal. But then like a year later, 2 years later, it can't be gotten anymore, you know?
Yeah, no, and I think that's interesting, right? Like, okay, so again, my working definition, and we sort of touched on this in an episode we recorded and then deleted about like the nature of art and beauty itself, because it was just so navel gazing and boring that we couldn't bear to release it.
Yes.
But
except maybe we can release a special edition, back from the grave edition, for our biggest donors right now who don't exist.
Right. But when we eventually create a Patreon, we could release to you the most boring thing we've ever recorded as a gift for supporting us and viewers like you.
Yes,
But
exactly.
anyway,
This is like the Gnostic Gospels. Anyway, as you were.
no, you can't say this is like the Gnostic
We're moving
Gospels
on. No,
and
we're
then
moving
say
on.
as you were.
As you were.
How is this like the Gnostic Gospels?
It's just like the Gospels that you know and love, only a lot weirder, kind of a lot more boring, and nobody seems to be the same person they are in the real Gospels. But you have to pay a lot more for it.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah,
Can
this
we
is it.
call our Patreon episodes just our Gnostic episodes?
Our Gnostic episodes. I mean, they're only for the chosen few. You know, they're not.
They're for the chosen few. They're behind a paywall, and they are ostensibly worse.
Yeah, they are. Like, this is part of the point, is that they're worse. And that you need to be the kind, you should aspire to be the kind of person who wants the thing that's worse. This is getting us very close to Kitsch, actually. This is amazing.
It is actually getting us very close to Kitsch. But okay, so again, I'm an artist and I'm a psychotherapist. That those two things coming together are going to bias me. And that bias is this, that I see art itself as the application of creativity to a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
In its smallest form, I'm a little kid, I'm drawing this picture, I'm giving it to my dad. So there's a direct one-to-one relationship between artist and perceiver, audience, whatever, you know, the viewer, the creator and the viewer. Okay. On the most macro scale, I'm this painter or this dancer or this sculptor or this, you know, filmmaker. I'm slaving over my craft. I'm making this thing, and then I'm giving it to society, and society is viewing it and interacting with it. Right. So it's creativity applied to relationship. That is at its core what we are categorizing as, you know, capital A, the arts. Right. Ooh. I mean, that's sort of the thing that encapsulates all of those totally separate practices and disciplines, is that there is an interaction between this creator who slaves over it and the audience. Kitsch, in my argument, in my thought process, is that same equation, but with the artist inexplicably removed from it. So there is this thing that's soullessly created, but then as soon as it comes into being, is treated with the same, and perhaps in some cases, as with Christmas kitsch, even more reverence and personal attachment than if I bought a Picasso.
Right.
Like if you ask your mom which is more sacred to her, which she has to give up, your first baby ornament or this like $1,000, $10,000, $14,000 painting she was gifted, unless your mom's a sociopath, most of them are going to have a hard time choosing.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so the initial connection that like Kitsch is somehow built for emotional manipulation and like extreme emotional housing I think becomes really important here, that like something about it is placed so that it is capable of and sort of like encourages to become like immensely housed in a gigantic, thick emotional storeroom, basically. Like there's something about it that encourages you to like immediately make this a part of like rituals in your life, like conceptions of what's important. Like the idea of Christmas is just so
Personal.
richly involved here, because like
I see what you mean.
anybody who celebrates Christmas at all, from any formality, is gonna have all of these kinds of like things that they do, these like personal family rituals, these personal ideas. And we're gonna spend a whole episode, I think, trying to talk about this idea. But you want to make these rituals that are like personally, emotionally, and like familially meaningful. And how do you do it? Well, one way that you do it is that you like use pre-existing mass-produced objects as like the vehicle, like the gears by which your emotional clock moves through the month of December. And like that's basically what Christmas Kitsch has a very particular role in doing.
But I wanna make a, so you know Ken Craycraft?
I do.
Okay, so Ken Craycraft, for those of you who don't know, he's professor of philosophy, isn't he? Teaches philosophy at the Athenaeum of Cincinnati.
I think so.
Yeah, he teaches something, but I mainly know him as a writer for the Cincinnati Enquirer. Really brilliant fella, and he did this whole kind of breakdown of the importance of Christmas kitsch. And actually, I got to interview a few years ago when I still had my weird EWTN radio show. I got to interview the philosopher Peter Kreeft on this too. And both of them have this take. And it always shocks the Scroops that I tell about this, because Scroops love Peter Kreeft and they hate this point. But these two men both talk about how kitsch on some level, Christmas kitsch on some level, is, without knowing it, the best celebration of the incarnation.
Okay, tell me more.
Because there is this tacky, observably cheap, grotesque thing. The inflatable snowman, the baby sitting in a feed stall, that without a personal relationship there could be seen as easily tacky and pointless. But if you approach it with grace in your heart, is transcendent on the highest level. This has always been a part, I will say this, of Christmas, even before kitsch was possible in the sense of mass-produced plastics. I mean, I would argue that kitsch goes back even to the ancients, where, you know, you have medievals mass-producing holy metals and things like this. But as far as our modern definition of like plastics kitsch, you know, this predates that, where the Germans have this, and some people say it's apocryphal, but I don't think it is. The pickle tradition, where you hang a pickle in a Christmas tree, and it's green and stubby and does not have any of the glamour that the other Christmas ornaments do. But the kid who finds that pickle gets the best present under the tree, because that pickle represents baby Jesus, and you're looking for the humble, unseen, gross thing amidst the awesome, shiny things. I think it's not a mistake that if any of us have any personal relationship or interaction with kitsch at all, it is, as you're saying, mostly at Christmas, because Christmas is inherently a celebration, I would say, of what makes kitsch great. The celebration of something seemingly humble and useless that actually has tremendous meaning within a relational and personal context.
Interesting.
either our savior
Yeah.
or an inflatable Santa.
Right. See, I agree with you about the pickle thing, except that like the fact remains that like the person who is found, as long as it's a real pickle, the pickle in the Christmas tree has already received the greatest gift on the tree because he can eat a pickle. I don't like why. I don't know that it needs to be more elaborate than this. He is the one who has the pickle. Like virtue is its own reward.
That's exactly what my wife would say about this topic. She'd be like, "The best present is eating a pickle."
It's like, what more do you want? This is
it
so
one of those
obvious.
giant pickles from an Amish gas station?
Yeah, I'm like 1,000 years old, and like I legitimately like stop everything so I can like buy a giant pickle and eat it for like 20 minutes.
It's so good. Like at a Renaissance festival, just like a big old pickle on a stick. Holy crap.
It's incredible. Like, why even put it on a stick? It's so stupid, but it's delightful. Anyway,
My guy.
yeah, this is the point. This is, yes, exactly. I like that. It's really fascinating. I find myself kind of repelled by it, but I also really love it, and I think that's probably a good thing.
But that's the thing. You should be repelled by it.
Right,
Like,
and I think that's
Christmas,
I don't want to resist
Jesus,
it. Yeah.
the incarnation are so gross, and gall darn, we've sanitized it too much. This is a baby
Okay,
sitting
yeah.
in a feed stall surrounded by poop, and
It smells bad.
I know Benedict
Yeah.
gets mad about this, but animals and dirty homeless shepherds, and he's growing up and he's bleeding and he's spitting in mud and rubbing it in people's eyes, as I say in almost every episode, and he's weeping, and our God is a messy, gross, repellent God, and is beautiful and sacred because of that.
Yeah.
And so is Kitsch.
No, okay. Now this is really intriguing. Let me give you an example that's one of my very favorites about.
Sure.
I think it is an illustration of exactly the point you're making, which is that okay, so one of my very least favorite sort of like late 20th century American things that people say about Christmas is the phrase, quote, "keep Christ in Christmas."
Right.
I
Yeah, it's
love
really
to
annoying and
hate
twee.
everything about this. It's amazing. Okay, so there's that. I'm not going to explain right now. We'll just take that as granted. Okay, when I was at a parish in Cincinnati, the pastor, who's a good friend of mine, just loved everything about Christmas, like everything about Christmas Kitsch. Like this was his heart's jam, like everything
This is
about
when
it.
you were at the parish that I met you at.
Exactly.
Okay, which is
and,
funny because I didn't like the guy you're talking about, but we do share our opinion on Christmas. So
Yeah,
you're
listen,
making
you
me
have
like him a little bit more.
Yeah, you have a lot more in common here than you may have thought. He would do this whole big elaborate thing at Christmas with like all this stuff, including in front of the altar, this like life-size baby Jesus, like plastered doll in a manger, and like all this tralala, and like a gigantic spotlight on him, and it was incredible. And like I had read, the patroness of the parish, the parish is Saint Gertrude, and Saint Gertrude the Great is this really amazing mystic from the 13th century. And I had been reading some works of Saint Gertrude where like she has all these visions and mystical encounters with Jesus like around Christmas and stuff. And in one, she like picks up this representation of Jesus and like presses it to her breast, and it's like this really emotional moment, and it's very beautiful. And so I had just been reading it and like I've been very moved by it, and it's Christmas and I'm really excited and stuff. And so like I bow in front of the altar and I see this like baby Jesus in a, like this very, very trashy, very kitschy plaster baby Jesus in a manger with a gigantic spotlight like burning out his eyeballs. And I'm thinking about like, oh, St. Gertrude would like pick him up, and isn't that beautiful? And I look and I think to myself, well, maybe I could pick him up. And I look, there is a pipe cleaner wire tied around baby Jesus's foot, fettering him to the manger so that
the
nobody
hell?
runs away with him. So baby Jesus is literally bound, shackled, and fettered to the manger.
There is some agnostic beat poet out there who could find great commentary in that.
Indeed. I thought like this is this is like the worst thing I've ever seen and the best thing I've ever seen, because this is how you keep Christ in Christmas.
You shackle him to it.
That little guy is trying to run away, so you shackle him to it.
Jesus thought he could get out of Christmas, but he's got another thing coming because we have pipe cleaners.
Because we got pipe cleaners. But like,
oh my God.
So everything about this is amazing. But I gotta say, I mean, I think it's a pretty good example of what you're talking about, where like the kind of crass, gross materiality about this is like way in the forefront in an uncomfortable way, because listen, it's a big parish. Like, somebody would legitimately maybe run away with this baby Jesus, because you get crazies everywhere.
Or a little kid would pick it up and think it was a baby doll, or
and like all these things,
crap.
and it's a cheap plaster doll, and so like if somebody picked it up and then dropped it, it would in fact be broken. Then we would have no baby Jesus. JK, there was actually like 50 baby Jesuses everywhere, but anyway, that one would be broken. So I mean, like, I don't know, I am intrigued by this idea about like actually beginning to see an important like revelation about like the very power of the incarnation, in particularly the most unattractive part of like the material aspects of the way in which we celebrate it now.
Mm-hmm.
Because like the whole thing about the incarnation is that Christ doesn't run away from materiality, right? And so
he runs towards materiality in a deeply unsettling way.
Yeah, exactly. So like maybe we can accept, I mean, maybe we can accept that some of this like is actually a helpful reminder, precisely because it's so like unsettling and like WTF-ery, you know.
Well, it's funny because your whole thing, you know, you hate keep Christ in Christmas. I hate the trope in so many Christmas movies of, you know, someone good, the protagonist, often Santa himself, complaining about how Christmas has become too commercial, or, here's our word, kids, materialistic.
Yeah.
And that bothers the living daylights out of me, because that's the whole point of Christmas, is the divine becoming material. You cannot make Christmas more materialistic than it is by its very definition as a celebration.
Oh,
it is the celebration of the divine becoming material, and therefore the material becoming divine. You can't say like that. You want to get Christ out of Christmas? Deny that reality.
Right.
Take that out.
Right.
Put a smiley halo around an over-spiritualized Jesus. Get rid of the dung. Get rid of the plastic. Get rid of the mangy shepherds and the Mariah Carey on the radio. And then you will have successfully removed the material from Christmas, and by extension, the material God from Christmas.
Interesting. I mean, there's something to that. No, but then, okay, so interesting. But then the contrary cautionary tale, of course, would be the contrary motion, right? Which is like, so you're saying, and I find this very like disturbing but intriguing, that like the very crassness,
definitely my brand.
Yeah. Well, fact, disturbing but intriguing. Jacob Flores pipe check. This is by the way what everybody wants, I think, from their psychotherapist, is disturbing but intriguing.
If you asked, probably 90% of my clients would say, yeah, that honestly that fits.
That's there it is. Yeah, 5 stars, or 4.5. Disturbing but intriguing. Yeah. So yes, like, so this is provocative. I like it. That like, okay, so the kitschiness, the crassness of even the kind of tacky, crass sort of material aspects of Christmas and the way that we celebrate it. This is actually a helpful kind of occasion to like be shaken out of a too sanitized vision of like a too safe kind of Jesus, a too like distant kind of disincarnate God. Okay, I get that. But there is the contrary problem of where like something can become, in fact, like strictly materialized to where there's no spirit left, right? So like,
sure,
where it's no longer an incarnation, it's just matter, and there is no God left. So it's not that as Athanasius, among many other people, will say, like, God becomes man so that man can become God, but just that, like, Yeah, here's this thing. Look, I got like a Santa in my front yard. And it points
Right.
nowhere, right? This isn't a signifier pointing to someone or somewhere. It's just a thing.
Right. Well, and I will say, okay, so this is, I'm really hesitant to even bring this up to the degree that I might ask our producer Kyle to edit it out. But I think an example of what you're talking about, because I want to do a whole episode on this so much, and I shouldn't touch on this, but an example of what you're talking about is like, in my opinion, an NFT, a non-fungible token, right, is a piece of digital art, non-reproducible digital art that literally means nothing to me. I'm only buying it basically so that no one else has it.
Right.
That, you're right, that's a purely material thing, with no emotional significance other than capital attached to it. So yeah, yes, it is possible, of course, for something to be entirely material and have no sort of divinity or spirituality or higher emotional resonance attached to it. But I do think that for my working definition of kitsch itself, I would say that when that happens, when something is so material and it doesn't have any like godliness or romance or personality attached to it, I would say that's no longer kitsch at that point, right? Like that's a mass-produced dustpan and broom that I'm using to sweep up the Christmas tree. That's not the Christmas tree itself, right? That is a purely utilitarian function at that point. My argument is to be kitsch, which is this weird, kitsch is this weird shared space in the Venn diagram between the arts and utilitarian function. What is in the shared space between in the Venn diagram between Van Gogh and my trash can? It's kitsch, and it's because it was created soullessly. It was created without that divinity and without any real care for it. But then I am in sort of a micro flawed icon of the incarnation. I am bringing that divine significance to it myself by adopting that little baby's first Christmas ornament or adopting that blown plastic snowman, and I'm bringing it home and I am applying that significance to it, thereby imitating in some way the way that God himself brings his significance to the material and elevates it.
Interesting. But so yeah, okay. So that there's a duty, dignity to the way in which you engage with these things to allow them to become, in your own experience, a reminder of the incarnation, like a small revelation of the reality of the fact that like God took to himself a human nature kind of thing.
Sure,
like,
or even unconsciously. I mean,
well, obviously, I'm not
unconsciously,
saying like I'm going to sit here and be like, well, this is going to be like this in this way, but like,
right. You're just sort of imitating it, whether you know it or not, with the significance you bring to the thing.
Right. It's definitely not automatic though. I mean, that can't essentially, like, it's like proper incarnational dynamic here, like can't be something that's automatic or essential to its object, like essential to the definition of kitsch, right? Because that makes kitsch, like, by definition, religious art, which I think would be a little bit strong. I don't think would really work.
I mean, I'm having a hard time. And this is just because I'm a Catholic and so my bias, but I'm honestly having a really hard time thinking of an example of kitsch that isn't in some sense religious. I mean, I know there must be some, but I'm having a really hard time thinking of an example of one.
Yeah, well, you just have. I mean, see, this is the whole thing that's weird about kitsch, is that you have like the exact same pick a pattern of like the exact same 30 mass-produced Christmas objects that then like go and dwell in two different homes, and one of them gets like Velveteen Rabbited and like jumps around at the end of the affair and like becomes a living like way, like a material way in which these people kind of meditate on the living reality of the incarnation, and then the other family in which they live, like, they don't get Velveteen Rabbited, they don't get loved, they just like get shoved out one day, shoved out and then shoved back into boxes, and then they get thrown away or whatever. Like the people hate it. Nobody knows why they're doing it. They just, there it is,
Right.
Right. So like these are, but equally available, at least equally available human experiences with the same physical objects. And so they have to be the same physical object.
Not
so it's
to
either kitsch or
overly-
it isn't.
Not to overly anthropomorphize, but I would say that's not the object's fault. Like if I like let's use the Velveteen Rabbit. If I buy that toy for that child and that toy isn't properly loved, that's not the toy's fault. Right? That's because the child didn't approach that toy with the proper condition of spirit.
It's because the
Right.
child sucks.
Right, because the child sucks. To use the parlance of the day, as Lebowski would say.
Is it the parlance of the day? It was parlance of the 80s, at least.
Right, yeah. We got to do an episode on Lebowski, man.
Oh, man.
But anyway, not the toy's fault. The intention, the created intention of that toy is that it would be loved that way. Even if it was soullessly mass-produced, the intention of that toy is that it's going to be... No, you said it yourself. You said it yourself because of emotional manipulation.
It's right. It's
intended for that emotional encounter. It's soulless
emotional
mass-produced.
manipulation is different from emotional encounter, and this is where he hits the danger, right?
Okay, go ahead. Explain yeah.
It can just foster, if it just wants to foster kind of cheap emotion that doesn't go anywhere, then like I guess that's it. Like something that so I mean this is I think maybe if there's something good or helpful in what Scrutin was pointing to, if he's talking about kind of something that's emotionally cheap or whatever, something that creates a simulacrum, an imitation of real emotion, like real emotional attachment, but without actually leading anywhere, which I think is real. Like this is a real possibility of just being kind of like that. This thing sort of makes me have some sort of nice feels, but that's the end of the affair. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't really mean anything. It's not actually an important thing in my life, and I just move on.
But is that the object's fault?
Well, the object, right, doesn't have agency, and part of the premise here is that these are like soullessly mass produced. So why are they mass produced? To make money, which is fine. That's totally cool. Lots of art is made for money. That's fine.
My point in asking is that the object's fault is if the soullessly mass produced thing elicits in me the feels, do I not then have a responsibility to cultivate that spark of feels into a bonfire of genuine emotional encounter?
Maybe, but then also maybe the thing itself isn't a fitting vessel for it, right? So like maybe the thing itself isn't actually fitting, worthy of like a strong emotional
but you
place.
You can say that, but to use and again, I don't want to overstep, but like if we're adopting my comparison here that kitsch in some way images the incarnation itself, there were plenty of people who went to Jesus for the feels and then left. Right? I mean, it's the 9 lepers don't come back, and he says this. They got what they wanted and they left. And that's not the Jesus's fault in that moment. It's not because he was an improper vessel. It's because those people had an emotional encounter but didn't follow up on it.
Yeah, they got what they wanted and then they pieced out.
But I don't think that says something about the object of the feels. Whether that's Jesus or whether that's the plastic doohickey, it's created soullessly with the intention of having some emotional connection to me. And then it's my job to then cultivate that emotional connection. And if I don't, that's on me, not on the thing.
Well, I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So here's an example of like what I'm thinking about is so like,
yeah, sure.
There is this amazing Thomas Kincaid painting called Christmas at Graceland. Is that was
God.
Elvis's thing?
My parents love Thomas Kincaid, and I just can't tell you how much I dislike Thomas Kincaid.
Yeah, it's because it's like we took a dumpster fire, we filled it with meth, and then we threw it into an abyss. It's incredible. He's like the absolute worst. Interesting, like you can look, there's a really interesting article about this one time. Like, you can look over the course of his career about how he intentionally kitschifies himself, because he's actually, he has some talent as an artist. And so his early work,
super talented.
His early work actually makes use of his artistic talent in a way that like seems to convey desire for something other than just kind of raw marketability. And then he like decreases that as time goes on and increases the kitsch factor, basically, to be like maximally inoffensive, maximally emotionally manipulative, he creates a kind of raw canvas for like unsculpted emotional manipulation, basically. And which is I just think, so this is I guess like where I still think like there could be dangers here with kitsch. So he has this image, Christmas in Graceland, which you look and it looks like every other garbage Thomas Kincaid painting that you've ever seen. There's like completely insanely non-realistic light halos around everything. It's like people have that, like there's an eye disease that means that you see like all these light halos all the time.
Right.
So
everybody's got a very, very high fever.
Yeah,
and it's just like light extending from everything.
Extending everywhere, like you have been tripping for a long time, and it just looks like this, and it's just this stupid painting with like way too much light, and it's like whatever. But then if you look kind of in the middle, if you can be stopped from being distracted about how bad everything is, then there's like an incredibly bad painting, because it turns out he was a really, really, really bad figural drawer. Because he's a painter of light, not painter of figures, stupid. But there's an incredibly badly rendered like young Elvis with his wife.
Scylla?
Whatever, why not? Or was that one of them is his daughter? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I don't know.
And
I am no great fan.
And they're like to each other or something, like some kind of Christmas greeting. It is
right, the classic Yuletide greeting.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the most abominable works of art I've ever seen. When the first time I saw it, I actually laughed out loud. I mean, it is.
God, I cannot wait to buy this for you for Christmas now.
It is just hilarious. Okay, so this thing is just, everything about it's bad, right? It's raw emotional manipulation. The technical artistic stuff about it is 100% garbage. There is nothing desirable here. Like, I have no emotional connection to Elvis or the woman in his life who may be Lisa Marie or maybe Priscilla or maybe, I don't know, something else. There's no redeeming value to this at all. To propose that like I as a viewer have a moral obligation to like have a incarnational emotional encounter with this Christmas at Graceland just rings as existentially false.
So my definition that we started out with of kitsch is art which was produced, was the artistic relationship between artist and consumer, but with the artist inexplicably removed from that equation, so that it's art created soullessly, but then treated nevertheless as though it were still a romantic or otherwise sacred object. I'm inferring from you, though, that your counter definition of kitsch is any art that is produced only for the sake of commercial viability.
Well, no, because the thing is, the Kincaid does actually fit your definition. Like, just because we know his name doesn't mean it doesn't. I mean, everything about it fits your definition perfectly. I'm just
asking if that's because you're coming in with a negative bias towards kitsch, and I'm asking you, is that how you would personally define kitsch up until perhaps this conversation? Maybe I convince you, maybe I don't. But would you say that's your definition of kitsch is art made just soullessly for it's just to make a buck, man. It's not real art, man, because it's not a
Well, I don't know. I'm actually entirely comfortable with art being made for the purpose of making money. I don't. I mean, I'm entirely comfortable with this. So no, I don't think so.
So the beard and robes do not actually identify you as a full hippie.
Yeah, well, I know it's weird. It turns out though. Yeah, it's incredible. One of my favorite authors of all time, Alice Thomas Ellis, has a novel in which one very, very minor sub theme going on through the whole novel is that characters keep having this conversation about whether what the relationship between art and commercialism is, and basically all the characters in the novel who are sympathetic are like one of the clues that the author gives that these are like sympathetic characters. All the characters in the novel who are sympathetic are like very pro art as a commercial venture. And the unsympathetic characters have the kind of like stereotypical like, oh my gosh, art for art's sake and money destroys art kind of perspective. And like my girl Alice like has my heart here. So no, I'm not uncomfortable with the fact that it's just being made for money's sake. That's fine. I'm okay to even to recognize like the crassness of some of these things can be important for like recognizing the disturbing potency of the material world in which God has become man, right? Like in the incarnational world. But like it seemed to me like you're proposing a stronger like moral obligation when you say like it's not the object's fault if it doesn't become this kind of like.
Well, look, I think we have a moral obligation towards beauty, capital or lowercase b, always. If I mean, and this is coming from as a psychotherapist who is always telling people to listen to their damn feelings and not just repress and move on. And this is coming in as an artist who is painting shit that people would otherwise ignore and trivialize, right? So I am very passionate about this. I do think we have a moral duty towards beauty of any kind. If it makes you feel some kind of way, you should look at that more closely. If you don't, that's on you. You're missing out on something. It might be a little something like, oh, that rose smells nice. Or it might be a big something like you ignored that baby in the manger because you thought it was just a hobo baby and not the savior of the world. But yeah, I do think that we have a moral responsibility to beauty, and we have a moral responsibility to specifically our own emotional response to something beautiful. And if that little glimmer happens inside, if our little Grinch hearts beat one size larger, we got to go, oh, this is something I got to look at a little bit more closely. I don't think that just because the thing that triggered that emotional response was soullessly created for a Walmart necessarily means that the response therefore is superficial. I still think that we have that moral responsibility. That doesn't mean that we have that moral responsibility universally. You could look at that snowman and feel nothing, and I could look at that snowman and feel something. But if I feel the something, I owe it to myself and to the something that I felt to investigate further, because I believe that's probably the Holy Spirit tugging at your heartstrings saying, there's something here you should probably tuck into, my guy.
I respect that. No, I respect that. I think from the thinking about it from the perspective of the object, like just focusing the attention on the object rather than the way in which somebody engages with it. Like the difficulty is just that like it's possible to create a simulacrum of real beauty, real emotional experience. Not that they're the same thing, but like of that actually short circuits your ability to have a deeper and richer encounter with beauty, to have deeper and richer emotional experience, by proposing a horizon that's so small.
Okay, can you walk through an example of that? Because I've been wondering what you meant this whole time by there can be dangers in Kitsch. I forgot the word that we were talking about today. And there can be dangers in Kitsch. And honestly, you're saying I'm going too existentially deep and crazy. Anytime anybody says there's dangers in a thing that isn't holding a knife, I always go, all right, you're a little bit full of shit, right? But I actually might get what you're saying here. So elaborate on this. Give me an example of what you're talking about here with that kind of lowering of the threshold.
Right. So Well, so okay. So the Kincaid, this particular painting is a really great example because uh, the way in which this proposes like the joy of Christmas, like family encounter, all these kinds of things, has been so bottomed out and perverted by a kind of like multiply layered fandom, that like ultimately I'm enthusiastic about this because of fandom about the Presleys,
Elvis, yeah.
and then like I'm fandom because of being a fan of like Thomas Kincaid, I guess, and all these things. So all of this is kind of like emotionally evacuated, so that I am not actually aroused to a yearning for a deeper intimacy with like my own family and like memories of like the joys of homecoming at my own Christmases. I think about how more famous and more beautiful people like had those experiences, and isn't that awesome?
So you're talking about escapism, essentially.
Well, but in the end, it creates a kind of so this particular example, it creates an emotional short circuit that can't actually of its own directionality can't actually direct my heart to a deeper and richer emotional connection. Again, extrinsically it can. Like anybody can look at something and just sort of inject their own meaning into it. Fine. But the thing itself doesn't have that directionality.
Is there an objective metric by which one could determine, though? Like, because I'm really trying to take this out of subjective experience. Because you're right, in your opening statement, kitsch is something that you only say, is a word you only use to describe crap you already don't like.
Right.
So I'm really trying to take it out of that subjective mode, and I think you're hitting on something, that there's a form of beauty that can be that can be escapist in the sense that you say, I want to take this home with me, or I want this to deepen my family relationships or my own personal relationship with God, or whatever relationship it is, whether that's I go to the Disney park and I want to take some part of that beautiful experience that enriched my family home with me, or whether that's the baby's first Christmas ornament or what have you. And that there's also this kind of toxic form of that, which says like, I'm just going to sort of escape into this, and I'm going to sate my desire for something better by emotionally masturbating all over this thing. I think a good example of this can be sometimes, and again, not objectively, not always, but circumstantially, subjectively, I think a good example of this can be like a Hallmark Christmas movie where like I really long to be loved that way, but I'm watching this movie basically to sate that desire, not to actually inspire me to go out and pursue a romance of my own.
And nothing about, and like, how do I know the difference? Well, partly is because nothing about the way in which human beings act in those situations is real, right? Like the Hallmark Christmas movie is a good example, because it works by telling lies. Like it's predicated on lies about how human beings respond to situations, which are these like cheap emotional tricks to make the human being simpler, to make my story work more easily while being able to just kind of churn it out in 20 minutes.
So is what you're saying, but you're not saying this, but can I infer in what you're saying that you agree with my definition of kitsch? I won't reiterate it, but as proposed, you just think there's a dangerous subtype of kitsch that is so dishonest in what it's depicting that it can actually become sort of pseudo pornographic in the sense of the fantasy it's posing actively distracts from and diminishes your potential to make your own reality more beautiful.
Yes, I think that's a really helpful way of summarizing it. And my only question that I don't have resolved in my own head is like, is this two different kinds of thing, or is it a similar kind of thing that just like, this is a danger that's present in the genre, like this is a weakness in the genre? Like, I mean, any genre is going to have strengths and weaknesses, and like,
right?
This is a corruption that's going to be within it regardless.
I would lean more towards that. That second one, because I always like to, and I don't. We don't do this artificially. I mean, again, as you pointed out, we literally try to talk about these topics as little as possible prior to the episode because we want it to be genuine. But we do have a really lovely tendency. I would like to believe guided by the Holy Spirit, to wrap these episodes up with kind of an invitation to any artist who is listening, any creative person, because you don't have to be a capital A artist to be an artist, or a capital C creative to be a creative. But we end it with sort of an invitation to anyone listening, with some kind of admonition to say, hey, go create this thing and also keep this thing in mind. And I like what you're saying, that yes, kitsch is like any other object, like any other art form, can be good, can be bad. When it is bad, it's because of this. When it is good, it's because of that. And so watch out for both of those things if you happen to create kitsch, because God knows, I mean, like, there are artists, real honest to God artists, who are hired by these companies. I mean, I personally know one of the guys who designs ornaments for Walmart.
Amazing.
And he sketches all year round, and he's putting a lot of effort into that. Now, yes, the company itself, the person who's creating that thing, is completely soulless and just, a machine is stamping it out. But there are conceivably artists who could be listening to this episode saying, well, I create soulless, shitty kitsch for a living. My art is used to produce that. Maybe I'm one of the thousands, this is insane, literally thousands of artists that the Thomas Kincaid company hires to still create paintings in his name 10, 15 years after his death.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. This is exactly
so
what I
maybe
mean.
you're
Yeah,
that
right,
guy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I like the idea that we're saying, hey, no, kitsch can actually be great. It might start out soulless, but it can invite people into genuine emotional encounter in a way that, whether or not they consciously recognize it, does in fact parallel the incarnation. But there is a dark side to it, where it can become so fantasticalized that it no longer points back to a hyper reality. It just distracts you the way porn would. And you should watch out for that shit.
I think it's yes. Yeah, yes. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. I kind of want to talk about this for 5 more hours, but I also kind of recognize that that's a really good stopping point. And unfortunately, we didn't even get into the only form of kitsch that I really don't like, which is those god-awful Fontanini nativity sets at Christmas, which like everybody collects. And
oh my gosh, you hate Jesus.
No, and what's funny is I don't hate them because they're mass produced or they're plastic or they're an imitation of like a deeply personal artistic tradition, which we should do a whole episode for, the Creche, although it does make me uncomfortable. I hate them because they're so gosh darn tan. Like, the whole color palette is just tan on tan on tan. And I just find that really gross and drab and sad looking. So we haven't even gotten into Fontanini. And maybe we should do a whole episode on Fontanini. But
maybe what I'm hearing you say is that you need to Warhammer Quest your Fontanini nativity set and just
wait, you mean like use Fontanini figures as like D&D miniatures for the game Warhammer?
You just crossed like 3 different streams there. Back your nerd truck up. I mean, you got little miniatures and you need to paint those suckers.
Oh, paint them. I see what you mean. I thought you literally meant design like a campaign around using, like, that would be badass.
I am
actually
so open to this. Yeah, I am so open to this.
Oh my God, this is the bonus Gnostic content that we need in the Patreon. Is you and
Dear
I doing
Warhammer 40K?
We
need you to
literally
sponsor our campaign.
You can totally just do like campaigns that you film and people watch. People watch these all the time. It's a huge internet subculture. We could make our own campaign where we use Fontanini, like a whole campaign set within like the events of the Nativity. We can have like all your character types. We can have wizards, and we can have what's it called, bards and clerics and all those things. We're using only Fontanini figures.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have like a dark elf druid mage sheep. This is gonna be amazing. Okay.
Oh my God,
ladies and gentlemen, this might happen. Pay close attention to our Gnostic Patreon page, which is so Gnostic it doesn't even exist yet.
Oh my God, I love this so much. Okay, this is perfect. This is a perfect place to end. If you happen to be a person who creates kitsch, maybe watch out for the whole porn aspect of it. And if you happen to be a person who enjoys kitsch, listen to your heart. Listen to those little tingles in your heart, because maybe the Holy Spirit's calling you to a really profound emotional encounter. And if you happen to be the ghost of Roger Scrutin, rest peacefully, my man, because you're a troubled guy. You're a real troubled guy. And for everyone else, go forth and create cool things.
This has been Created Things, an art, soul, and mind production with Jacob Flores-Popchak and Father Gabriel Toretta. Production by Kyle Meineke and Jessica Flores. Theme song by Federico Carranza. For more on the podcast and on its hosts, visit artsoulandmind.com.